All right, let's work on this one here for a little bit. So notice a couple things right off the bat. Just because of the soft nature of this, I've rounded the corners, so that's kind of nice. And I've already relieved out the bottom layer right here. Now this one here has multiple layers to it, much more than 4, right? And so you see one of the things I've done is I've outlined the layers that I have. But remember, that's just engraving. That's not carving. And so, but the drawing on there is like really permanent now. So I can't get rid of it too easily. Okay, so how do I make multiple layers like that? Because I only have so much surface to go through, right? This is how I would do it. So on the Spartan one, it's very straightforward. You'd have a bottom layer, you'd have a middle layer, and then you'd have a top layer. Something like that, right? Whereas on this one here, the rose, you have multiple layers. So how are you going to pull that off? You only have so much area to work with. Well, let's say that we have a top layer right here, and then we have to have another one coming into it. So let's say we have one petal, okay, but then another petal, and yet another petal, yet even another petal. And that way we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different layers, seemingly, but yet it's actually not even as deep as the one with the Spartan because of the way we've angled cut that down. Okay, we did a little bit of that just a minute ago when I was doing the Spartan's helmet, and I said, okay, we'll cut down in to that layer a little bit in order to then make the rounding part give us a little bit more room to do that. Okay, so same kind of thing here. Alrighty, let's show you. So I've got this here, and let's see, where do I want to start? I'll go ahead and start here, right up here at the very top, right? So that's what we want to have. That's both at the top, but it's also would be the lowest, wouldn't it? Because this is what would be coming out furthest to you. Here, then here, then here, then here. So, well, I guess it doesn't really matter where you start. In fact, you know what? I think I'm going to start in the easiest spot. I'll start right here. So this is underneath this, right? So I'm just going to cut this at an angle. And soften that edge a little bit. Like that. So you can see how this is now a softened edge and it's going underneath here. And what's more is that this part here this is where the petal folds out. So this is on top of this, right? So we could just cut this at an angle as well. And soften that edge a little bit. So now we've got this is folding out over here, and yet this is coming out from underneath this. I think I would actually take this down a little bit more right here, because I'm going to have this other angle right here where it also folds out. You know, roses they're actually a pretty easy flower to draw and to create because they're just a cup inside a cup inside of a cup. So you can see we have this rolling into this, which is rolling into this. And then so forth and so on. Here would be my next petal, which is underneath there. Okay, and on these, kind of like the helmet, I'm going to do a little bit of undercutting so I get a nice, strong, sharp line where this is folding over. And make sure this is nice and soft. So I still have a little bit of an abrupt edge right here. Transition that even softer. This one here, this is rolling over, so I want to make this edge a little bit softer this way. Just that little bit is enough to give me the sense of rounding. If I go a little bit too far, which I didn't do too bad, but I could also go back and undercut it, and just a half of a millimeter, just really, really small amounts, is all it takes to create the sense of a line right here. Right, so forth and so on. This would then be coming out above this one, wouldn't it? And yet we have this right here. Get a smaller tool. Remember, there are multiple tools, and so hopefully I'll be able to keep a system where I can give you just a set of 12 tools, nice and clean, and you can give me back a set of 12 tools, nice and clean. And all the different tools, as you're working with them, you'll find have different uses. And whatever you do, don't stash them in your box. Don't stash them around the room. Don't do that with any of the tools. Because, we're just going to rummage through your box looking for them anyways. So there's really no point in it. Here, this is coming out. And so it's underneath these guys, which is underneath these guys. And so it's just a matter of sort of softening this edge right here so it's not too abrupt. If I needed to go deeper in here, I could do that. Meanwhile, I can soften this edge right here. Got plenty of room to round that. And this is all giving me a really nice sense of three-dimensionality. And it's really not going very deep at all. In fact, it might be, in some ways, it looks so much more complicated than the Spartan one. But for me, I find this actually a lot easier. The other thing, too, is that a lot of people will be tempted to do more graphic things like the Spartans. But the thing with something that's very graphic in nature, has very sharp lines and edges, is that it's really easy to see what's wrong with it, right? Because everything needs to be flat and perfect and straight. Whereas if you do something that's more organic, it's a lot easier because all it has to be is pretty or nice, Whereas this one, you'd have to sort of, measure it, right? Everything has to be perfect. This one, it just has to look right. That's all there is to it. Okay, so I'm going to continue to work on this one a little bit, and I'll show you my results. Okay, so I'm back, and I wanted to show you what I came up with. And so you can see that the rose on its surface looks a lot more complicated than the Spartan. But like I was saying before, to me it was actually easier because the Spartan had to be right, whereas the rose just had to look right. Okay, but let's show you a little bit about how I went about doing this. So first off is that, there's an extensive use of undercutting. Cutting underneath the edge just the slightest bit, and that's going to bring out a strong line. There's also that idea of just rounding, just a little bit of rounding is what's going to give you that sense that something is actually round in nature. Okay, so here, in that each of these layers, just like I was showing you on the paper here, is really not much or at all below the layer that would be considered to be on top of it. Whereas the Spartan is very much like here, down to here, over here, and up to here, right? The Rose is much more, we've got this, and then this is on top of that. It's really not much deeper. Here is on top of that. Here is on top of that. Here is on top of that. So forth and so on. And you can see by doing this, we can get really, really subtle things. Like, I don't know if you can see it in this video, but under here, I've got the subtle impression of a leaf. So there's actually 3 leaves here. 1, 2, and underneath there, there's a 3rd leaf that goes behind this. So a leaf that goes behind both this leaf here and this part of the stem right here. And then of course there's another leaf that goes in front of the stem here as well. So we see that we get all this different layering, but it really didn't go any deeper at all, if you can see that, at all. And like I say, it was a lot easier and actually a lot more fun. But the only other thing I might talk about here is composition. You can see both in the Rose and in the Spartan, I don't have a whole lot of blank space on that bottom layer. Spartan actually has more than the Rose, which has a little bit less right here, right? Okay. So that's one thing to think about. And it just leads to the idea of an overall picture, a composition. And you might ask yourself like, well, Mr. Kuhn, how did you know where to put the Rose, how to round it, how to have things go over, what goes under what? How do you make that shape and how do you make it 3-dimensional? The answer is quite simple. I've looked at a lot of roses, and in fact I've looked at them very deeply because I've drawn a lot of roses. And so when I have you doing those sketchbooks, that's why. And that's why I have you doing real things, because by looking at real things, then when the time comes, you'll be able to recreate that. You'll be able to translate something that is physically round, physically coming out, and put it onto a flat surface if you draw, right? And drawing is just much quicker than carving, it's much quicker than the sculpting, it's much quicker than making you know, a finished painting, whatever, right? Just draw in those sketchbooks, because that's how I know how to do this, is because I've done a lot of the drawing that I've asked you guys to do, right? And it also leads to craftsmanship. So every time I draw, there's a chance to draw that line a little bit straighter, a little bit better, make things a little bit more in proportions, make things circles a little bit rounder, right? So that practice also leads to craftsmanship, which in the end leads to manifestation. You know, these were just ideas not too long ago, and now we have these nice finished slabs. Anyways, well, with the next ones, I'm going to go ahead and make the mug and show you how that's going to work.